What I want to talk about with you is air hammers, chisels, compressors, and dust collection systems. And we're going to do that all in 15 minutes. No, we're going to do that in 30, 40 minutes. Leave some time for questions, okay? So I'm going to cover a lot of material quickly. At our last session, we covered power equipment. And you know, when you're using a saw, you're not really in touch with the stone. So we're cutting off a lot of material, but it's not that transcendental state that when we use a chisel. You all can still hear me, right? Okay, good, good, good. So I was looking for a word that meant, you know, being one with your stone. And I spent quite a bit of time looking for a word, which I'd love it if someone knew. There is a word called eutieria, relatively new word, which means being one with nature and being lost. So you don't even feel as yourself, you feel part of nature. So I have a new word for us to start off, okay? Eupiedria, which is a euphoria as we sculpt with stone using chisels. And that's what we're going to talk about. So we're not going to cut off too much that way. Today I was working on a 3-foot by 2-foot sculpture of a hand, and we were using the saw, and we started cutting off things we shouldn't cut off. Went to our air hammer, and we've had total control. We were able to get the planes of the sculpture much better that way. So the advantage of the air hammer, of course, that's what we're going to talk about first, is that it runs at about 5,000 beats per minute. How many people here, if I can see hands, have used or are using air hammers? So most everybody. All right, so then I'm going to go through pretty quickly. Barbara, you didn't raise your hand. If you have more questions, you can ask more, okay? So the air hammers come in different sizes, and the size is determined by the size of the piston. It's not the hole in the front of the air hammer, not the hole, but the size of the piston which is within. I know most of you know this. So they go from a small air hammer, like there's a little one, which doesn't take a different size opening, it's called a piccolo or a bantam, depending on the brand. And then they go up from there, from a 1/2-inch piston, a 5/8 piston, 3/4 piston, 1 inch, 1 1/4, all different sizes. When I first started, I went to a workshop 25 years ago, and they said, "You're a big guy, you can handle a big one. We're going to give you a 1-inch long stroke air hammer." And after about an hour, I could not feel anything in my hand. I was totally numb. And I said, well, screw this. I'm using angle grinders and die grinders. And then someone said, why don't you try a 3/4 inch one? It's quite a big difference. And I was able to use that really all day long, all week long. So you have to choose an air hammer that's appropriate for the job and appropriate for what you can handle. So there are 2 basic brands, right? Well, there's 3. I'll mention all 3. One is the American brand called Trow & Holden. And Trow & Holden out of Vermont makes it just an outstanding air hammer. They have 2 choices in each size. So it gets a little complicated. They have a short stroke and a long stroke. So the short stroke literally means the piston is not going very far and it kind of hums. Not as aggressive, still works well. And then they have the long stroke. So like this is an example of a big 1-inch long stroke air hammer. If I was doing a monumental sculpture 6 feet tall, then I might want to use that. Then the other brand is Kutori. Kutori, which is like this one, Kutori splits the difference and goes halfway between long stroke and short stroke. There is another brand called a Bavarian or German. Is anybody using that, the German air hammer? Would be T-Barney, yes. So the advantage of that is it's like a gun. So it has a good feel to it. And it can remove a lot of material. It's a total different kind of construction, whereas these air hammers have they have 3 parts. They have the outside casing, they have an inside liner called the bushing, and they have the piston. And maybe there's a piece on the back where the hose goes on too, back here. So it's basically just 3 or 4 parts. On the German air hammer, it's got 17 parts. And it seems to generate a lot more power with less air. I'm sorry, it has more air, but it generates a lot more power. So even though it's just humming like a short stroke Trown Holden, it seems to be removing more material. On the other side of that is it is 17 parts. So if it breaks, you have to take it apart, clean it regularly. Barney, does yours break very often? Oh, he's muted.
I'm unmuted now. I've never had one go down on me that I couldn't fix by taking it apart and oiling it up. What I like about them, and I have all the different hammers there are, is there's a trigger.
Right, so it's like a gun. It's more ergonomic.
So it's like a gun, and your wrist is straight as opposed to going sideways. And at least two of the Bavarians that I have, you can actually adjust the air at the trigger. So to each its own.
Yes, to each their own. I don't like the green one, and mostly because, I sell stuff. So I find it's got so much power that it will actually snap a chisel unless you get the power down to the right level. And preferably you're using chisels from the German company. And those seem to be more reliable on working with that air hammer. So air hammers require air. Now, this is going to be a strange lecture today because I have good news. Air hammers are great. I have bad news. To run them, it's very expensive. I'll tell you why. The air hammers require about 4.5 to 5.5 CFM when your compressor is set at 90 PSI. I'll explain that. CFM is cubic feet per minute. And a portable compressor, like a 30-gallon tank on wheels, would generally generate enough air to run an air hammer. Not enough air to run a rotary tool like a die grinder, but you can run your air hammers on them. We usually use, well, we're going to get to compressor a little bit. As I mentioned, the green one requires a little bit more air. It requires more like 7, they recommend 7 or 8 CFM. So that won't be a portable. That'll be a more stationary, upright type compressor, okay? So as far as using the air hammer, the way we hold it, and I'm going to show you a couple of ways. The Italians hold it this way with it between their fingers. And then the chisel, either you don't put the chisel in until it starts running. I know most of you know this. If you put it in and then start up the air hammer, it's going to go shooting out. So you start up the air hammer, you put the chisel in. My favorite way of holding it is with 4 fingers and my thumb on the collar of the air hammer. The Italians will often do it this way, where they have 2 fingers underneath and 2 fingers above. So it's different ways of holding it. It doesn't really matter, whichever way you feel comfortable. The 2 important things are never have it so that your wrist is way back. You don't want to go back this way. That's carpal tunnel. So you want to make sure your hand is straight. They do have gloves that force that. I don't need that. I just make sure that I'm, kind of in this direction, all right? And the second thing is that when you're using your chisel, we have a tendency to try to force that chisel in the stone. And then we end up cramping with our hand. And really go as loose as you possibly can. So when I have my air hammer running, my chisel's on the stone, and I can hardly feel pressure on my hand. I'm just using my hand basically to just twist it as I'm turning into the stone. Sorry, we can't do demos here. I'm in my living room, so we can't show you exactly how it works, all right? All right, that's some basics. The other thing is that when we use the air hammer, we want to make sure that we don't go straight into the stone because we'll end up bruising the stone. And we don't want to be so shallow that we just go skidding over the surface. So we're picking it up and going up and down until it gets to the right point where stone is moving. We're removing material, but we're not just glancing over the stone. So I know these are the basics, Chisel-wise, there are carbide chisels which have inserts in them, and I know you can't see that, but there's an insert in this chisel. And let's see if I get a bigger one. That's a bigger one. There's an insert. So there are 2 parts on the outside of the chisel called the shoulder. And the advantage of this is that carbide does not dull as fast. It's a high carbon steel, so I don't have to sharpen it, but maybe once a year for my work. If you use steel, you might have to sharpen it every day or every week. And here's an example of a steel one. Okay, if you can, I don't know if you can see this. I'll hold it up closer. The steel one is much thinner because it doesn't have to have two shoulders holding the carbide insert. So if you're doing detail or lettering, it's pretty nice to use a steel chisel as compared to a carbide one. But for general purpose, I use only carbide chisels, and we can discuss this later. I'm sure people have different opinions on all this stuff. So the kinds of chisels, of course, are tooth chisels. So here's an example. Couturiers paint some gold. There's a 3-tooth and a 4-tooth. If I'm doing alabaster or a softer stone, or I don't want to take too much off or go too far down, I'll use my 4-tooth chisel because the power of the piston is being split up into 4, so it's not as abusive. If I really want to remove a lot of material like we were doing today, then I'll use my 3-tooth chisel and really knock into it and get a lot of stuff moved. There's also, of course, bush chisels for texturing, which come in 9 teeth, 16 teeth, 25 teeth, depending on how aggressive you want to be. And there are rondelles, which are the rounded chisel. A rondelle is kind of neat because we could use points. So if I'm taking a lot of material off and I'm far from my final surface, I'll use my point. Or if I'm using my saw to slash and burn, cut, and remove material, I might use the point to knock all those fins off. But if I use this too close to the surface, all that power going into the point could bruise the stone, which you discover when you start doing your rasping and sanding. How'd that white spot get in there that I can't get out, right? So a rondelle is kind of a neat chisel because it's a compromise between a point and a flat. So the cutting edge of this is acting like the point and removing a lot of material, but it's since it's spread out, it's not creating that bruising effect. And that's a rondelle, round chisel. So those are the basics. Just point out for the little air hammers, the bantam and the piccolo, then these small flat ones have 1/4-inch shanks on them, and they come in a variety of tips as well. So brand wise, I do like the Couturiers myself. This is not meant to be a commercial at all. I like the Couturier because I like that medium stroke on it. But for the little air hammers, even though I have an Italian one here, I kind of like the bantam better because the bantam seems to be more reliable. So I would say that the Italian one is the Ferrari and the bantam one is the Cadillac. Well, let's say an older Cadillac, and it just keeps running and doesn't break down. So I like the bantam Trout-Holden brand real well. But these are all excellent lifetime tools. You should oil them, and when they're brand new, you oil them 2 drops every hour, and the oil goes in to the back of the air hammer, or if you have a whip hose attached, like these hoses, you got the idea. If you have a hose attached like this, it goes into the end of the hose. 2 drops for the first 100 hours, and thereafter in the morning, midday, and before you finish up. The air will push the oil through the hose, the whip hose, which has the valve which controls speed, and keep it oiled. And that's real important because if you picture your car, which is also just piston, and you don't have oil in it, as you know, the piston will fuse, and then you have to have a huge job getting it cleaned, fixed and honed. And the same thing's true with air hammer. Has to have oil. That's the most important thing to keep it maintained. All right. So on the chisels, the sharp edge is here. And when we sharpen it, we don't want to get it too hot. Actually, when I sharpen a carbide chisel, I don't use water. I use a green stone. You can do it by hand or on a bench grinder. And I do it, I can just hold it with my hands. And I go on the bench grinder and just do it until I can't hold it anymore. And then turn it around and do the other side. So you don't need any water. If you do get this hot and you submerge it in water, the carbide will break. So we don't do that, all right? But on steel chisels, to sharpen them, I'll go on the bench grinder for about 30 seconds. put it in water. 30 seconds, put it in water, because it's got a tempered edge we want to keep nice and hard. The other end of all these chisels are what's called annealed. They're relatively soft. And I mention that because we never take a hammer and hit an air hammer chisel, because what you'll do is you'll mushroom it. It goes into the air hammer and it will score the inside of the air hammer and maybe hurt the piston. So air hammer chisels are for air hammers, okay? All right. So I'm trying to move along pretty quick. Most of you know this information. Let's talk about compressors for a moment. So I mentioned that these air hammers require only 4 or 5, 5.5 CFM at 90 PSI. So I want to clarify one thing. There's a term they're using more recently called SCFM, and we use generally CFM. And that's a way to make a compressor sound better than it is. Just to briefly explain, SCFM, the new term, is how much air it generates if the compressor is at the perfect temperature in the perfect pressure from the outside environment. But we'd rather use a number called CFM, and that's about 10% higher than CFM. So CFM is really the number we like using because that's the reality, and it's not overstating things, all right? So on a compressor, I look for 4.5 to 5.5 CFM and 30 gallons. Horsepower is irrelevant. That's a side issue. Those portable compressors with 30 gallons will run and not have to stay on all the time. If it's 20 gallons or less, then it doesn't build up an air pressure and it has to run all the time and you end up burning it out. So that's the reason that we go with 30 gallon. Now here's the bad news. So I was researching things for our meeting today, and a year ago, those 30 gallon 5 CFM compressors were $400. And now, 1 year later, they're $800. And I spent probably an hour and a half searching Amazon and eBay and all the tool companies, and I could not find one less than $700. So the air hammers generally as a package cost like $400. And it used to be then the compressor was 400, so it's like a 1-to-1 ratio. It's an $800 investment. But now, unfortunately, the air hammer is only half the price, a third of the price of the total. And when I looked at it, ironically, the big air compressors, the 240 volt, 60 gallon ones that are stationary, have not gone up in price. So you can get a really good Ingersoll Rand 60 gallon tank for $1,000. Or you could buy a portable, which will only run air hammers, not rotary tools, for $700, $800. So it becomes a whole new issue now, just recently. And again, the big compressors, if they're generally running at like 11, 12, starting at 11 or 12 CFM. So like the Ingersoll Rand I told you about is like 11.5 CFM, and that can run a die grinder, air drill, a sander. So you get a lot more flexibility, but now the investments become much bigger, and you've got to have 240 volt power to run it. So I'm sorry for that bad news. That was a surprise to me in the last few days as I was doing my research. Let's see, when I use a compressor, it's really noisy. So what I do is I have the compressor. I do most of my sculpting outdoors, even though I'm in Kansas in the cold weather. So it was 62 today, by the way, so it's wonderful. So I have the compressor inside, and then I run a pipe just through the building and put a quick release on it. And then the hose could be literally, I think today we had 50 feet of hose on the compressor, and that was no problem at all. We had plenty of power. So it's not like electricity, you know, with an extension cord real long, you lose some power. It's not really the case, 50 feet. But if you can do it 25, fine, do it 25. But by keeping it indoors, like in the garage or in a building, it's less of a problem. So with a noise issue. Let's see, I'm looking at my notes, and I think that's most of that. So we can go to the next issue, which is, again, we're gonna have time for questions here at the end. Dust collection. And here, after I finish, I would like to hear from you and see what solutions you've had as well. So the best solution is to spend between $8,000 and $12,000 and get a WIHA waterfall air circulating device. The guys that sculpt, the people that sculpt down in Orange County, they chipped in and they bought one of these things. It's I think 12 feet, 8 or 12 feet wide, and it has water running and it pulls the air in. And I have a picture of that to show you. I'm not serious about you buying it, of course, but they did. So that's what it looks like. Picture that's about 8 or 12 feet long, wide, and it's got water flowing on those two horizontal barrels there, and then water, then air behind it that's sucking the dust in. I'm going to tell you how to build one of these in a second, okay? Other methods, before I go into the one that I kind of like, is you could put in this. These are from like Granger, and they're basically boxes that have fans in them, and they pull the air in. My experience is they don't pull a lot of air in, and you have a filter you have to clean daily, and they're not really, they may be 50% effective, okay? Another way, which is more effective, is if you can have some way of sucking the air down. So there's a friend of mine in Brooklyn where they have all the wisdom, and she lives in a house, so she's carving in her basement, taking 1,000-pound stones down the steps to carve in the basement, and she can't make a lot of dust. So what she did is she built a platform, or had a platform built, and put a grate on the platform, and then put some HVAC pipe that sucks the air into a filter under that platform. Then she sculpts on a table that again has a grid, a metal grid that her stone is on. So when she turns it on, it sucks the air down below her table, below her, into that vent and into the filters. So that's kind of a clever way of doing it in a condensed place, all right? The other method is what the Italians do. So if you go there and you go to their places where they're working outdoors and they can't create a lot of dust, like in Pietrasanta, because it's now become gentrified with Benetton and other stores, so they get a lot of complaints about dust. So they built their own WIHA type waterfall system. And what that is they get a trough, we would use a cattle trough, put in a corrugated fiberglass or a metal sheet that's maybe 5 feet wide and 4 feet, 5 feet tall, punch a bunch of holes in it, put a pipe or a hose above it. I'm simplifying, I'm going to show you a picture. Punch a bunch of holes in the corrugated metal or fiberglass, and then have a pipe going above it or a hose going above it, and have water dripping out over the corrugated metal or fiberglass. And what happens as you sculpt and the air, put a fan behind you, the dust goes into the water and goes in the bottom of the trough. And then you can scoop that out every month or so. So you have a pump. So the components are a tank, a corrugated sheet that's going horizontal with holes in it, a pipe going or hose going above, and a little pump that recirculates the water. So this is an amateur sketch. You could see that. Can people see that at all? Maybe not. You see it? Okay. So you see there's I'm gonna turn that right. Okay, there's a trough, a piece of sheeting, just a copper pipe going above with some holes in it, a pump that recirculates the water, and then a fan would be behind me. If you want to make something like that better, and it's not really hard to do and it's not cheap, it's not expensive to do. If you want to make it a little more effective, you could put a fan behind this thing, and then have the air being sucked into it. And that way, all the dust that you're creating is going towards that water, getting caught, and then going to the bottom of the trough. Does that make sense? Okay. The other way, of course, the simple way is you put a little hole in your house or your garage or where you work studio, and you blow it on the neighbor you don't like, the one with the barking dog. So that's the other solution. So I've covered a lot of stuff in a short period. And I think we should open it up, if that's okay with everybody. Is Ellie with us? Oh, there you are. Okay. So can we do a little open discussion about things? So
Sure.
I might,
Do you want to be the one calling on people, since I may or may not be able to do that?
okay, I can do that. So why don't we just talk about Marcos?
Yeah, so I'm in a group studio and we're looking for a quiet compressor that can accommodate at least 2 or 3 of us sculpting at a time. Do you have any suggestions?
Right. So I have answers, but you may not like all the answers. But if you have that many people, I would try to get something like a 20 CFM compressor upright. Has something happened to all your pictures like mine?
Yes.
Okay, all right. But you can all hear me, right?
Yep.
Okay, so
Wait a second, Erin, did you change that?
Yes.
Okay, she just changed it so you could see everybody.
okay, that's fine. So to answer your question, Marcos, I would probably, if you assume people, you can add up the CFM. So you got one person using an air hammer and 2 people using rotary tools. And the rotary tools are generally about 8. They could be higher, but let's say 8 CFM. So that's 16. And then you got the person using the air hammer, that's 20. So I'd probably try to get around 20 CFM.
Including plus a polisher.
The polish, there are all kinds of polishers. And when I buy them, I try to get the ones that are 8 CFM. There are 20 CFM polishers, industrial ones, but the smaller ones work just fine. And I don't want to use up all my air. So I use an 8 CFM polisher. And I use that same tool for my drill as well. So I can screw on a core drill and use it that way with water going through it. So that would be an upright 20 CFM compressor, 60 gallons okay, 80 gallons is better. Now, I didn't answer your question about noise. It will be noisy. So they're usually around 85 decibels. And to get one that's quieter costs much more money, more like 3,000. There are a set of compressors, which are called screw compressors. That's like $10,000. So that's getting really out of hand. So it's easier, rather than trying to buy one that's, maybe you'll find one 75 decibels, but it's probably easier to get one that's powerful enough and then put a compartment around it with some insulation. Just make sure it has enough ventilation. So I have mine with a closing door that's ventilated, that's insulated, and then it goes to the outside so it keeps cool. Does that answer your question, Marcos?
Thank you. Yeah, that was helpful. And one of my studio mates just said, we'll just build a box around it. So
He's not wrong. As long as you have ventilation, that's not wrong. And I say right now, on the portables, by the way, DeWalt is pretty decent price and Craftsman is pretty good. They're both made in America. Porta cable. On the big ones right now, for some reason, Ingersoll Rand has the best deals. And I'm finding the best deals. You have Tractor Supply there, TCS. They seem to have the best deals right now. So you might, if you explore that, both for portables and for the larger compressors.
he said Tractor Supply.
Yep, Tractor Supply.
Thank you.
At least in Kansas anyway, they have the best deals right now for compressors.
Looks
Other
like Allison. Oh, Allison
ahead.
had her hand up. I can't see her, but I know that she had her
Wherever
hand
you
up.
are, Allison, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'd be so curious to hear from you and maybe even a few other folks about the best way to store an air hammer when you're not using it. I've seen such a variety of ways people store theirs, and I'm just wondering what's the best, what's for longevity and cleanliness.
I can start and then people can join in. So I have I have 15 air hammers because we do classes and stuff. So I make sure that at the end of use, I put that oil in. And if it's going to be for a long time, I might put in 5, 6 drops, blow it in for about 10, 15 seconds. And then I store it on a peg upside down, I store it like this on a peg that I have on a board. And I never have a problem. I took one out yesterday that I haven't used for 6 months and it just starts right up. As long as it had oil in it to keep the moisture at bay. Some people take the hose off, get a bottle, like grape leaf bottle, a skinny bottle. They fill it with naphtha or kerosene. I'll expand on that. And they just immerse it. And that keeps it from rusting. And it also keeps all the oil from congealing. And then when they take it out, they put in 10 drops of oil and then they start up again. Naphtha is better, but I think in California, naphtha is illegal. Am I correct? Barney, you know that? Yeah, I told people and they said, well, I can't find it in the hardware store. So the Italians use kerosene, and I suggest you stop smoking. So it's more volatile, but just a solvent, you know, that because it's all metal parts. So long as the hose is not into the solvent. But again, I don't do that. I just oil it up well, store it upside down, and I don't have any problems. Other people have suggestions on that.
Can you hear me? This is Matt.
Hi, Matt.
I had a conversation with the previous owner of Trow & Holden, and he claimed that naphtha is not a good solution because over time it will absorb water and your air hammer will rust anyway. The solution that I had when I had my school near the ocean, because it was salt water, I immersed them in mineral oil. However, the mineral oil that you might buy at the pharmacy is a bit too thick. You need to search for a very thin mineral oil. Otherwise, it'll take a long time to get it out of the air hammer.
Great advice, Matt. You know, I'd say I don't soak mine in naphtha, but I have a jar of naphtha. So if it clogs, you know, if I'm finding it's not running right, probably because it's the oil has congealed with the dust, I soak it in naphtha overnight, just overnight, and then I take it out. It dries real quick. So it's interesting that it puts water in. That's something I didn't know. Good to know.
Well, there was a guy named Norm. He I don't know if he's still at Trow & Holden, but that's according to him.
Well, Norm was the owner. Now Randy is, but yep. So he's knowledgeable. So maybe not soaking in naphtha.
So the typical solution that the Italian artisans use is the same mineral oil, and they'll just fill the air hammer with mineral oil, and it can be stored that way, and that's the way that they will clean it out.
Right.
That over time, if it gets gunky, you get the carbon buildup, you just fill it full of mineral oil, wrap it in a rag, and run it until all the oil comes out of it. It's messy, but that's the way they clean and flush out the air hammers.
When I go to Couture, which is, you know, in Italy, and they wouldn't disagree with that, I'm sure, they were showing me how they soak it in kerosene just to clean it out, not to store it, but just to clean it out. They store it overnight, they pull out the kerosene, but as I said, that's a very volatile material. So
yeah, I'm sure it wouldn't hurt. It's not great lubricant, but certainly it'll have the it'll dilute, you know, it'll dissolve buildup, I imagine.
And Matt brought up a good point about the thin mineral oil versus thick mineral oil. The same thing's true with oil that we oil our air hammer with, that the typical tool oil you get at Home Depot or Lowe's is too thick. And we should use a thinner oil, like it's called either 10-weight oil, sewing machine oil, something that's really liquidy, because we don't want to gum it up. And the thicker oils, you're gonna have to end up soaking it to clean it up more often.
You can find it on Amazon. It's called spindle oil. It's about $13 for, I think, a pint or so. But you can also go to Trow & Holden. They don't have it on their website, but if you write them and ask for the oil, then they sell it for just a little bit more than that, just a couple dollars more than you can get on Amazon.
Or there's a company in Lawrence, Kansas too. We'll talk about that.
How about Marvel Mystery Oil?
I don't know about that. I don't know how thick that is. I don't know its consistency.
Its viscosity is quite thin. We used to use it on our yacht.
Really?
Mhm.
It's a mystery to me.
Okay, maybe they don't make it anymore. That was.
No, I
years
see it.
ago.
I see it in the store. I see it in the auto store. So just as long as it's really, it should be really thin. That's the key.
So I have a couple of air hammers that I've had for over 40 years. And only one of them did I have to actually take apart and do some soaking, but the other one's still going strong, and other ones have been 30 years. And I use a rubber plug on the piston end. I put a couple drops of oil in there and a rubber plug in there to keep the oil in there. And then, of course, you know, maybe 5 drops on the air end, and I use a rubber foot, you know, you get for stools, that goes over my nipples, and that keeps the air in there, and then nothing goes in there, and it just keeps the oil and the tools nicely lubricated.
Are you wearing those rubber cups right now on your nipples?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. You know, I also buy the air hose things for cars. You know, it's a little kind of nipple thing, and I stick it on the end of, I stick it on here, on the end of my hose or on the end of my air hammer. And that way I avoid dirt getting in, because you pull it off with your whip and it touches the ground, and then you got some dirt and it gets in the air hammer, and that's really bad. So it'd be, just make sure that the end, the coupling never hits the dirt, or get a little fitting, a little rubber thing that can go on it from the auto store, and just keep that handy when you put it away.
May I speak? I have to go.
Yes, George. Hi, George.
Hi there. I have to go. Very good, Myles. There's just one thing more about oil. I noticed that a lot of the symposia people use what they call WD-40. Do you have that in the United States?
Yes,
WD-40?
common.
Yeah. Well, it's not oil. Okay, just remember that. It's a solvent. It's the opposite of oil. So
It's
don't allow it to
kerosene.
close with it. It's really a very, very thin oil that has no viscosity to it, whatever. So don't confuse it for an oil. There's
Absolutely.
another oil that I've been using for a lot of years. Here in Canada, they call it 3-in-1 oil. But really what it is often described generically as a light machine oil. And that is the other thing. But you do have to have enough viscosity in that oil that the oil will stay stuck to the inside parts of your air hammer without the air blowing it right through.
Mhm.
So that's why they make what they call air tool oil. It's a light enough viscosity that it won't gum anything up, and it's a thick enough viscosity that it sticks to the inside of your tool. The other thing about oils, it's not just to keep the parts moving, it's to keep ice from freezing the inside of your tool, the inside of the air hammer. That's a very big problem around where I live, right beside the water. It's always humid here, and they'll throw and hold an air hammer. Well, not so bad the throw and hold them, but the Italian air hammers, they'll freeze up solid right in the middle of summer. I don't know if anybody has noticed that, but they will, and because they suck in the moisture from the air, and they do the opposite. Then there's a great release of the air as it comes out of the tool, and that's the opposite of compressing air. It cools it off, and it'll freeze. And the Italians haven't got it together with tools that won't freeze, but throw and hold pretty much does. Throw and hold pretty much does, because they live in cold country. Look, I've talked enough. It's your show, Myles. But you know, in finality, there's as much more to be said about using air hammers 5-10 times over as what's been discussed here tonight, good as this has been. And you must all know that. We should do this again, because there's just seriously a lot more. If you're going to be using air hammer a lot, we've really just skimmed the top here. And so I'm going to have to say goodnight. I got a sweetie in there that needs my attention. So it's great to see you all. Wish I could see you more often, but I'm going to check out. If
George,
Thank you, George. Thank you,
George,
George.
before you leave, we are I'm going to mention at the end, maybe getting back together in 2 weeks where we have an open discussion more about topics that we didn't have enough time to cover. So,
Well,
so
I'll
keep-
sure get in on it. I have a habit of talking too much though, so you have to, anyway, it's really nice to see you all. I'm gonna go.
Bye,
Thanks.
George.
George.
Bye,
Thank
George.
you, George.
I want to mention one thing, and George was gave good advice. The air tool oil you buy at the store, to me, is too thick. So I would make sure that it's something a little thinner than that standard stuff you put into other air tools. That's all. For an air hammer, for a rotary tool like a die grinder, that's fine. But I'm not so sure I would use that in an air hammer because we're using a precision tool where there's very little space between the piston and the inside bushing. Air hammer questions, comments, compressors, dust collection. Anybody find a more creative way of collecting dust?
I have some input. This is Matt.
Hey, Matt.
An industrial strength vacuum cleaner with a funnel on the end of the hose is something that I used pretty successfully for many years in a very urban environment. It's not perfect. It'll get about 90% of the dust, and but you need to cut into the funnel. It's the same thing with the waterfalls, is you need to be close and you need to focus and cut so that your dust is going directly into the waterfall. And you can manage the dust pretty well with that.
You know what, as I mentioned, the one way is putting the fan behind you, and then it is harder to control the dust going into the waterfall. But if you put holes in the corrugated metal and put an industrial type fan on the other side, behind it, facing out, it sucks the air and then it collects the air from the whole room into that waterfall. So it's a little more effective, but a little more work, because then you have the fan. The fan's not behind you, the fan is behind the waterfall. But, you know, that commercial one that's $10,000, that's what they do, is they basically have a unit pulling in the air from all around. Camera. Oh, I tried a question. Anything else on dust?
I have a question. Are there people who have a variety of dust collectors that they have rigged up like Matt was talking about? Because if you do, it would be great to have you send them in maybe to Renee to be able to put on the website, or we can have a collection of them and we could put them out as a document, maybe of little designs people have done. Because I have two that I've made. No, I have one that I made and one I got from Patty McPhee, and it's too hard to describe what I did, but both are really effective for different situations.
Generally speaking, what did you do? Just generally.
Excuse me. One is, I saw that you had a picture of one of them that has holes in it, that's metal. Looks like I got it from the woodworking store. It's little.
You like that?
Yes, yes, that one. So we took that, we built it into a kind of one part of my workspace, and cut out the shape of it and sunk it in there. And under it is a big plastic, I guess you'd call it a funnel. Attached to that is corrugated hose, and that goes through my wall in my studio. I have another piece and it shoots out to the garden. Not to my neighbors who have a dog. And what I have is a plexiglass back and front. I carve right on top of it. I'm usually just using it when I'm sanding or doing smaller things. But I have used it for a larger piece, and I had to put wood blocks over it because it doesn't hold the weight. But it sucks most of the air down into there, and I'm using it indoors. So I can actually see what I have, how much dust gets in the rest of my studio.
I
It's
like
not
it.
very much.
I think that's a great idea. That's like what the Robin Hanford does in Brooklyn. She basically has a table that's pulling the air down. Sounds
Yep,
like
super inexpensive. Oh, I did mention, I have a dust extractor unit. Sorry, that's also outside. That's connected, sucks the air out. That was one piece, but I'm happy to draw a picture of it and send it out to people. And the
the
one I got from Patty McPhee is too hard to explain.
And the calcium will break up the soil in the garden.
There you go.
So you all know that stone sculptors live healthier, longer lives. You all know that. And you know the reasons why.
Calcium
We're more mentally acute and we're more physically healthy. And we live, I have lots of clients who are 94 years old who are sculpting stone. So there's 3 reasons. One is we're solving problems all the time. How should I make this line go? And is that really coming out the right way? And what tools should I use? So we're developing new neural paths. It's much better than Sudoku, right? And secondly, we're being very physical. Even if we're working with a small stone, we're moving around. So that, you know, when people talk about how to be healthy in later years and how to stave off Alzheimer's, one of the ways is being very mobile. And the third thing is if we're sculpting marble, we're eating a lot of calcium. And so we have stronger bones. So stone carving, we're gonna last longer than everybody else. That last thing is kind of a joke, but not totally really, because in Marble, Colorado, the water they drink is coming down directly from the quarry. That's the town water. And when they go in for bone density tests, this is true. When they go in for bone density tests, the doctors don't believe it because they're off the chart no matter what their age is, because they're eating all that they're drinking all that calcium over the years. So keep it up.
Thank you, Myles. Are there any other questions for Myles for now? One of the things I'd like to just, again, calling out to Myles, thank you so much for doing this and starting these discussions. And as several people have said, and George said it too, that many of these issues are, you know, we could talk about them much longer and more in depth. And if anybody wants to do that, please shoot me an email and we can arrange to either find somebody, or maybe Myles will talk about it more, or somebody else would like to do one of these tool talks. Happy to set that up for you. The other thing is that I'd like you to keep in mind that these talks are a benefit of being an NWSSA member. So could you all check to see if you are current members? And if you're not, please contact Renee or sign up. Renee, how would you want people to do that? What's the best way?
They should hopefully just be able to renew their dues online if they are expired. Feel free to reach out to me. Send me an email, renee@nwssa.org. I can look up your membership if you're having trouble logging in. If you need a password reset, any of those things, I am happy to make sure that you are online and renewed. And you can always drop a check for $50 to our P.O. Box. P.O. Box 2, oh gosh, I don't have it memorized, sorry. It's on the bottom of our website.
I just wanted to say, I'm sorry we covered stuff so fast. You know, usually we give about an hour lecture on air hammers and stuff. It's a short Zoom meeting. But if people have questions or suggestions, do email me too, because I want to learn new stuff every day and share what I know as well. So I'm always open to communicate with email. Okay.
And Myles, you are coming to Pilgrim Firs this summer, right?
We'll talk about that.
Oh, I hope you are.
Yeah. And I wanted to just give 2 thank yous while we're all together. I want to thank you, Ellie, for creating this forum for all of us. And also I want to do kudos to Aaron for coordinating the Flower and Garden Show. It was really great this year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, thank you, everybody, and we will do, Myles, are you open for the third Wednesday?
Sure.
Is this Wednesday?
Yeah,
I'm on
we might
vacation, I
just
don't know.
ask people what topics they might want to discuss. And
Do
we could
people want to do that? Does anybody have an idea now, or you can send me an email? I have a dinner reservation at 8.
Oh, I mean, we can
I
do
have about 5
gluing.
minutes.
We can do gluing, polishing, drilling, you know, all kinds of topics. So just tell Ellie what you might like.
Great, polishing.
And are people okay with us taking a longer time, like taking the whole hour to focus on one area so that we can go more in depth? Okay. Leah? Hi.
Yeah, so the top topics for the website that are articles that people go to are often anything that has to do with softer stone, because it's an entry level thing. Making tools that are in your garage and how to do your own shop inside your home and dealing with that. And anything that has to do with finishing. So I know that was a lot of things, but at very least, those are the very top of the top things that people come to our website for. So
That's great.
Can you shoot an email to us so we remember?
sure, it was mostly just somebody asking about topics. So I was like, oh, I'm gonna ping.
Okay, thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
It's
Sorry
late in
for the tech
Kansas.
problems, but.
Thanks,
we'll work
Myles.
it out.
This was great.
Thanks, Myles.